Hello, and welcome back to Absurd Land. If these haunting images already unsettle you, the stories behind them are far darker than you'd ever expect. Let's begin. Stare. A photographer visited a mental asylum in Asunción, Paraguay, and he kept having a run-in with this particular patient. The patient would repeatedly stand directly in front of his camera with his gaze steady like this. He is known to be violent, so the photographer took care to keep a distance, but the patient still managed to get in most of his photos. This wooden cage was known as the Utica Crib. Patients were locked inside for hours, unable to move or even sit up. It was meant to calm them down, but instead, it often caused fear, trauma, and humiliation. In the 19th century, psychiatrists were already treating patients with eating disorders. These 1892 photos from Paris show a young woman diagnosed with visceral hysteric anorexia. She slowly stopped eating until she developed cachexia, a stage of extreme malnutrition where recovery was impossible. At the time, anorexia was believed to affect mainly teenage girls. The dining hall for African American patients, circa 1915. In the 1850s, these facilities were available only to white patients, though. African American patients were housed in two smaller buildings without the same amenities and views. Women and men, white or black, were also separated. Still, 100 years before psychiatric drugs, everyone got the same treatment. This photo shows the brutal practice of forced feeding in asylums. Many patients refused food because they believed it was poisoned, suffered from delusions, or wanted to die. Though the procedure required medical skill, it was often done by untrained, violent attendants without a doctor present. Ohio's mental hospital, the Athens Lunatic Asylum known as the Ridges, was considered one of the creepiest in the area. It first opened its doors in 1874 and at the time provided the best care available. Most patients were Civil War soldiers who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. It became a place where family members would place those they just couldn't take care of anymore: the elderly, homeless, and rebellious teenagers. This is an X-ray image of needles driven into the flesh of a psychiatric patient. The needles were actually graphophone, which was an improved version of the phonograph. Restraint. This photograph was taken in Cuenca, Spain in 1961. Many pictures of children taken from inside mental institutions show them being kept locked in a basket or a coffin. For the asylum staff members, this method was one way to ensure the children would not run away. At Byberry's violent ward, patients often vanished, some found dead on the grounds, others sleeping in nearby yards. One woman was raped and murdered, and her body remained hidden on the property. Staff only discovered her remains after noticing patients carrying some of her teeth, which indicated she had died. Beyond ECT and lobotomies, doctors also used a brutal water cure, choking patients with wet towels until they passed out. The restraint chair was used to immobilize patients who were considered violent or uncontrollable. At the West Riding Lunatic Asylum in Wakefield, it was part of a broader effort to maintain order. Patients were strapped in for hours or even days to prevent movement. Though it was seen as a safety measure at the time, it often served as a form of punishment or control rather than treatment. This photo shows a man receiving electric sparks to his spine for a nerve disease caused by syphilis. The practice was inspired by Dr. Luigi Galvani's discovery in the late 1700s that frog muscles twitched when touched by metal, proving that nerves carry electrical charges. His cousin, Dr. Giovanni Aldani, later used this idea to treat mentally ill patients with electricity in French asylums. According to rumor, the man in the photograph was called Boxer. He was a patient at the Czerny Woda Mental Asylum, which served as a repurposed military hospital. Hospital staff would chain Boxer to avoid causing panic among other patients. This photo shows a patient receiving lateral cerebral diathermia in the early 1920s, a brutal early form of electroshock therapy that used electric currents to treat psychosis. It was soon abandoned after reports of patients suffering double shocks that could cause dangerous fainting or even death. This is Willard Asylum, built in the late 1800s on Seneca Lake. From the outside, it looks peaceful, but inside, endless corridors held thousands of patients for decades. For many, Willard became the place where their lives quietly stopped. This early 20th century photo shows a class of deteriorated patients sewing at Utica State Hospital. It marks a shift in treatment, as even the most demented patients were encouraged to join everyday activities. The goal was to help them regain a sense of usefulness and self-worth. Electroconvulsive therapy is a psychiatric treatment that induces an electrical seizure to provide relief to patients from mental disorders. In this photo from 1951, a nurse is preparing a patient for electroshock therapy in Central State Hospital in Kentucky. Lobotomy. Dr. Freeman was a physician who specialized in lobotomy. Dr. Freeman charged just $25 for each procedure. Over the course of his career, he performed as many as 4,000 lobotomy surgeries in 23 states, out of which 2,500 was performed using an ice pick. All of this occurred despite the fact that he had no formal surgical training. This photo shows restraints that New York State declared outmoded in the late 1930s: iron handcuffs, muffs, body straps, and ankle bands. In 1933, the State Department of Mental Hygiene set strict limits, a maximum of 2 hours for restraint and 3 hours for seclusion. Restraint chair for violent patients. This chair was used to control violent patients at the New York State Asylum in the early 20th century. An unruly patient's arms were strapped into the wooded wells, feet secured to the floor, and a belt tied around the boy. Sometimes a patient's head was covered with a hood. This is a 17th century insanity mask. The metal mask was used to restrain individuals deemed insane. It was designed to lock the mask onto the head of the insane person. There were holes for eyes and a mouth. Radium therapy. In the early 20th century, medical professionals used radioactive material called radium in the treatment of mental illness. Radium was used in many different forms, purportedly for its many healing properties. Individuals who dealt with impotence would be treated by inserting radioactive wax rods into the urethra. The women in this photograph are seen receiving radium therapy. Oftentimes, when a patient was experiencing a breakdown or fit, the medical professionals turned to confinement. From chains to cages to straitjackets, there have been many different kinds of confinement methods. The photo shows a young man strapped into a straitjacket, wearing a hat made out of mesh wire metal and locked in a chair. Though the young boy in the photograph is unknown, it is clear that he is undergoing a certain test at the Slipshod Home for Feeble-Minded Children. It is not exactly clear what test this was meant to diagnose or treat. It could have been just an experimental test. Restraint, the basket. As you can easily discern from the photograph, even children were not exempt from inhumane treatment. The boy in the photograph is a patient at the Slipshod Home for Feeble-Minded Children. In the 19th century, it was believed by the scientific community that carnal pleasure caused insanity. Devices such as this were designed to prevent the individual from indulging in their vices. They were often used in mental institutions. Insulin coma therapy involved injecting large doses of insulin to induce prolonged comas. Clinicians hoped it would reset psychosis. The procedure was dangerous and sometimes fatal. An unidentified female patient was admitted to Riding Asylum with general paralysis. She had been a theater actor and struggled with alcoholism, performing dramatic acts alone in her room, including mimicking dog tricks for invisible spectators. Her illness made her behavior unpredictable, terrifying the staff. This woman was admitted to the asylum for chronic mania. In the late 19th century, women were expected to be quiet and obedient, and arguing or speaking out could be seen as hysteria. Some were institutionalized simply for wanting to read or educate themselves, as at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, where book reading was listed as a reason for admission. If you enjoyed the video and want a part 2, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.